All right, so today we're diving into some breaking news surrounding the Daily Wire.
Yeah, this is pretty big.
Yeah, and our main source for this deep dive is a YouTube video from Candace Owens, and it's perfectly titled, Breaking News, Jeremy Boring Out as CEO of the Daily Wire, Candace Ep 162.
Right.
And this just dropped today, March 19th, 2025.
Yeah, today.
So
Right.
for anyone who follows conservative media, the Daily Wire is a big deal. So this change in leadership is it's going to raise a lot of questions.
A lot of questions.
Yeah, and for our listeners who I'm sure are keeping up with all this, we want to get right to it.
Absolutely.
Candace's video offers her perspective and observations, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And so our mission is pretty straightforward. We want to, break down the key events, the whispers, the rumors, the reactions to Jeremy Boring stepping down as co-CEO.
Yeah,
We want to understand what this means based on everything that's out there.
exactly.
Okay, so let's start with the announcement itself. Candace reports that Axios, the news outlet, they broke the story that Jeremy Boring is leading his role as co-CEO of the Daily Wire.
That's right. And Candace was really quick to point out the timing of it all, dropping this bombshell on the 1-year anniversary of her own departure from the Daily Wire.
Exactly, 1 year.
Almost like she knew something was coming, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a certain something in her tone
Yeah.
when she talks about it.
What I found interesting was how she described Boring's leadership style. She calls him an unusually front-facing CEO.
Yeah, that is interesting. What did you make of that?
She's coming from, a more traditional understanding of corporate leadership. She says most CEOs, they kind of operate behind the scenes, focusing on your strategy and numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But Boring, he was very public-facing, whether it was through on-camera appearances or his social media presence, all those long tweet threads.
Mm-hmm.
And she even connects this back to his background, mentioning that he was, a drama kid,
Yeah.
and that he even named the company after his drama club. So she's painting a picture of someone who's very comfortable with being, the face of the organization. Maybe even prefers it.
Yeah, someone who thrives in the spotlight.
Right.
And she brings up those very prominent brand extensions, that literally bore his name. Jeremy's Razors, Jeremy's Chocolates. Can you remind us about those?
Yeah, so Jeremy's Razors, that whole thing started because Harry's Razors, they dropped Michael Knowles after some of his comments on transgender issues.
Oh, right, right.
And so instead of Michael, launching his own brand, Jeremy stepped in and put his name on it. It was a very public, very direct response.
Just like a counter move, statement.
And then you have Jeremy's Chocolates, which came about after Hershey's featured a transgender woman in their International Women's Day campaign.
Right.
And Candace raises a really interesting point here. She wonders why, if the goal was to, champion women within their own circle, why wasn't it something like Brett Cooper's Chocolates, for instance?
Interesting.
Why Jeremy's Chocolates? Why not, highlight one of their own female figures?
It all comes back to that personal branding, right? Like, you wanted to be front and center.
Yeah.
Now, Candace also mentions that she had this feeling that something was off with Boring's recent public behavior, especially on Twitter. What do you think led her to that conclusion?
Well, she doesn't really give specific examples at this point, but she implies that there was a shift in his online persona in the weeks leading up to this announcement.
Yeah.
It seems like his tone or the topics he was engaging with, maybe they raised some red flags for her.
Okay, interesting.
And this kind of segues into some of the concerns and controversies that she then starts talking about. And the first one being the Brett Cooper situation.
Yeah. This was a big one. Brett Cooper's exit from the Daily Wire back in December 2024. It definitely caught a lot of people off guard.
He was very sudden.
Unceremonious.
And immediately rumors started swirling about Boring's involvement in choosing Brett's replacement, who was Reagan Conrad.
Reagan Conrad, who, as Candace points out, was Brett's maid of honor. So, people started speculating that maybe there was something more personal going on.
Right. But Candace makes sure to say that this is all unconfirmed.
Yeah, it's important to stress that this is still in the realm of rumor and speculation.
Yeah, Boring and Cooper haven't publicly said anything about this.
Exactly.
But there are a couple of things that Candace brings up that kind of add fuel to the fire.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, first, Brett and Reagan, their friendship reportedly ended after this transition.
Oh, wow.
And then there's the viewership numbers for Reagan Conrad's show, which apparently were way lower than what Brett Cooper was getting.
Oh, that's significant.
Yeah, Candace's Cooper was averaging like 500,000 to 1 million views per video, whereas Reagan's show was getting around 20,000 views in the first 24 hours.
That's a big difference.
Yeah, and this difference in viewership then becomes connected to another issue. Boring made some public statements where he seemed to blame the audience for not supporting Reagan Conrad's content.
Oh, that's not a good look.
No, Candace calls it ill-advisable.
Yeah, I mean, publicly criticizing your audience, that's generally not a winning strategy.
Yeah, and she even plays a clip of Boring defending Reagan, where he mentions that Reagan, she hadn't taken acting classes to be like Brett.
Mm.
And he also points out that Brett herself recommended Reagan as a potential replacement.
Okay, so he's trying to justify the decision.
Yeah, it sounds like he's getting defensive.
Yeah, like he's personally invested in Reagan's success.
Right.
So another interesting point that Candace brings up is the discussion around a potential sale or strategic partnership for the Daily Wire. This wasn't just speculation. It came from Jeremy Boring himself in an interview with Axios. What exactly did he say?
Well, he said that the Daily Wire wasn't actively looking for a buyer, but they weren't opposed to it if the right offer came along. He even specifically mentioned Fox News as a potential partner.
Fox News.
And he highlighted the difference in their target audiences, saying that the Daily Wire has a younger demographic and a stronger presence in coastal urban areas.
So he's acknowledging that there's a potential strategic alignment there. What did Candace make of that statement?
She seemed a little surprised, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
She brought up their previous goal of, taking over Disney.
Taking over Disney.
Which, implied that they were aiming for independent growth and dominance.
Right.
So Boring being open to a sale or a partnership with, a giant like Fox News, it suggests a shift in their long-term vision.
It does make you wonder about their future direction.
Right.
Especially within the larger landscape of conservative media.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next part of Candace's video, this is where things start to get really interesting.
Yeah.
She talks about Jeremy Boring's confrontational behavior on social media in the 2 weeks leading up to his announcement.
Yeah, this seems to be a key piece of the puzzle for Candace. She describes these online interactions as emotional and confrontational, targeting specific people.
Who did she mention?
She specifically mentions Theo Von, Joe Rogan, Jason Whitlock, and Ian Carroll.
Wow. So it wasn't just, disagreements. These were some pretty heated exchanges.
Yeah.
Based on, differing opinions on certain issues.
Yeah. And one of the tweets that Candace really focuses on is the one about Joe Rogan and Theo Von, where Boring says their conversation was the worst day for Jews he had ever experienced.
That's a very strong statement.
Yeah. Candace seems to question it. She mentions that Ian Carroll, who is also part of this online discussion, he specifically said that their conversation wasn't about Jewish people.
So it seems like Boring's reaction was maybe a little out of proportion.
Yeah.
There was also that interaction with Jason Whitlock regarding Ben Shapiro's petition to pardon Derek Chauvin. What sparked that?
Whitlock just commented that the timing of the pardon petition seemed strange. He said it was out of nowhere.
Okay. A pretty mild observation.
Yeah, but Boring responded with a really aggressive personal attack.
Like what?
He said something like, if Ben Shapiro cured cancer, Jason Whitlock would find something in it to expletive about.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then Whitlock commented on Boring's overreaction, and then Boring accused Whitlock of always being negative towards the Daily Wire.
It's strange to see this kind of public feud between, the co-CEO of a media company and another commentator.
Yeah.
What else did Candace highlight from this exchange?
Oh, Boring also accused Whitlock of supporting Andrew Tate, which Candace explicitly states is objectively not true.
So adding another layer of, unnecessary conflict and maybe even mischaracterization.
Right, and all this online behavior, it really contributes to Candace's feeling that something was off.
Yeah, I can see that.
And on top of all that, Candace mentions that Boring decided to weigh in on the whole Christ is King debate with a really long tweet.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And her take is that maybe he should have stayed out of it, especially, given his position at the Daily Wire. Those kinds of debates can get really divisive.
Yeah.
And then lastly, Candace points to some tweets where Boring suggests that Tucker Carlson was giving a platform to people with anti-Semitic views.
Oh, wow.
And she brings up an old tweet from January 2024 where Boring predicted that Tucker would eventually say that America was the bad guy in World War II. And Candace points out that in the clip that Boring was referencing, Tucker never actually said that.
So again, it's more public criticism directed at another big name in media.
Right.
It kind of adds to this overall feeling of tension and maybe a lack of unity within certain parts of conservative media.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've got a sense of what was happening before the announcement, Let's get into the official details of Jeremy Boring stepping down, as reported by Axios. What were the key takeaways?
So basically, the announcement says that Boring is stepping down as co-CEO so he can focus on creative projects, in particular his TV series, The Pendragon Cycle.
The Pendragon Cycle.
Yeah, and Caleb Robinson is now the full-time CEO.
Got it.
But Boring is still staying on in an advisory role, and he'll keep hosting Daily Wire backstage.
So he's not completely gone.
No, but it seems like the Pendragon Cycle, which Candace reminds us, was already delayed from last year. That's going to be his main focus.
Okay, so the official line is that this is a strategic shift for Boring.
Right.
He's moving towards more creative work.
But Candace has some doubts about whether that's the whole story.
Yeah.
Her initial reaction was that the announcement felt like an attempt to, kind of gloss over things without really explaining the reasons for this change.
Smooth things over.
Yeah.
Did she have any specific concern?
Yeah, she questioned Boring's new role, pointing out that he doesn't actually have a specific title like Chief Creative Officer. The term advisor, it just seems very vague to her.
Yeah, that is a bit odd. Usually in these kinds of situations, the new roles are clearly defined.
Right.
It does make you wonder about what exactly his involvement will be.
Yeah, and she also pointed out that there was no statement from Jeremy Boring himself when the announcement was made,
Oh, interesting.
which she found unusual because, he's been such a visible leader in the company.
Yeah, you'd expect to hear from him directly in a big transition like this.
Right.
So what about the statements that were released? Did Candace comment on those?
Yeah, she talked about Ben Shapiro's statement on the Daily Wire website, and she described it as very corporate sounding, just, praising Boring's leadership and his new focus on creative projects.
Standard stuff.
But she highlighted one line that stood out: "We can't wait to see what he does next."
Interesting choice of words. What did she make of that?
She felt like in this context, that line carried a lot of weight. It could be interpreted in different ways, but Candace thought it maybe signaled a more permanent step back from the day-to-day running of the company.
Like a goodbye.
Yeah.
What about Caleb Robinson's statement?
It was pretty much what you'd expect, expressing excitement for the future and acknowledging Boring's continued involvement with Pendragon.
Okay, so nothing out of the ordinary there.
No.
But Candace points out that the reactions from other people are where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Starting with Brett Cooper. What was her response?
Well, first she posted a GIF of Jimmy Fallon looking like he's trying not to laugh. And then she tweeted saying she was excited for Ben Shapiro and Caleb Robinson taking the company forward.
So Candace sees this as a positive reaction to the leadership change.
Yeah.
Maybe hinting at some underlying issues with Boring.
Yeah, and then you have Jason Whitlock, who, in his typical way, offered a more humorous but also pointed take.
What did he say?
He said that now Boring could finally dedicate himself to smearing him and anyone else who disagrees with the God King.
God King.
Yeah, that's a self-proclaimed title that Candace says Boring uses.
Wow. So clearly there's still some tension there.
Definitely.
What about other reactions?
Well, The Quartering, a YouTube commentator, he said that CEO departures like this are rarely voluntary. He suggested that maybe the Daily Wire is having financial problems or that they're spreading themselves too thin.
It makes sense to look at those factors in a situation like this.
Yeah. And he also mentioned that, Candace and Brett Cooper leaving, that could be a factor too.
Right.
And then we get to the more explosive claims from Ian Carroll.
What did he say?
He's alleging that the Daily Wire is going bankrupt, that Boring was forced out, that there's a big rift between Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring.
Whoa!
And he even claims that Shapiro hired his own PR person months ago.
These are some serious accusations.
Yeah. And he also said that the Daily Wire tried to trick Tim Pool into buying the company with a worthless stock deal.
Wow.
But it's important to remember, as Candace points out, that these are just allegations from someone who's had issues with the Daily Wire before.
Right. We should definitely take these claims with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
So finally, Candace shares her own conclusions on the matter. What's her overall take on Jeremy Boring stepping down?
Well, despite, some of the criticism she's had for him in the past, she says she agrees with Ben Shapiro and Caleb Robinson that this is tremendous news for the Daily Wire.
That's interesting.
She believes that Boring pursuing his creative goals, that's what he really wants to do, and she wishes him well.
That's nice of her.
But she also hopes that, more information will come out eventually and things will become clearer.
Yeah, it would be helpful to have more context.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've got a real mix of reactions here, from very carefully worded statements to more speculative and even critical perspectives.
Right.
It's a complicated situation, for sure.
Yeah, before we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth mentioning the other topics that Candace talked about in her video.
Oh, yeah, it gives us a bit more context.
Yeah, so she briefly talked about the photos of Donald Trump with Elon Musk's son, X.
Those were pretty
Yeah,
strange.
and she talked about the situation with Taylor Swift's godson Leo and his mom Jamie King, and Jamie's alleged struggles with addiction and how the father got custody.
That's sad to hear.
Yeah, and Candace kind of connects this to a broader theme of how things in Hollywood aren't always what they seem.
It's a good reminder that public figures, they have real lives and real problems too.
Yeah.
What else?
She mentioned her sponsors Gold Co Pure Talk and 7 Weeks Coffee.
Right.
And there were some mentions of listener comments and interactions, but she did go into specifics. And she teased that she'll be covering the Brian Koberger case in the future.
Oh, interesting.
And she highlighted some new merch on her website, mentioned her podcast hosting with Patmos, the legal stuff about the tour in Australia, and answered a question about facial recognition software.
So she covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, she did.
Okay, so to wrap up our deep dive today, it's clear that Jeremy Boring leaving the Daily Wire is a major event. It's sparked a lot of different interpretations. We've looked at the official explanation that he's moving on to focus on creative projects, but there are also suggestions of internal conflicts, financial issues, and the impact of his very public behavior online.
Yeah, it's a really complex situation.
It really shows how business decisions, personal dynamics, and public perception all intertwine, especially in the world of media.
Yeah, and this contrast between the official statements and the more candid and sometimes conflicting reactions, it creates a very messy picture.
Yeah.
So here's our final thought for you, our listener. Taking into account all the different narratives we've explored, the official story, the rumors of internal strife, the financial speculations, the reactions from people connected to the Daily Wire, what do you think is the most significant factor in this leadership change?
Yeah. What do you think is the real reason behind all of this?
And looking ahead, what do you think the future holds for the Daily Wire? How will they navigate this new landscape?
It's worth thinking about how business decisions, personal relationships, and public image all come together to shape these kinds of events.
And we encourage you to keep following this story and to think critically about the different sources and viewpoints that are out there.
It's a fascinating case study in how things work in the media world.
Yeah. So that's it for today's deep dive.
Until next time.
See you.